Jason Zandamela is going to visit the Florida Gators this weekend. We've got Brian Smith here to talk about him.
You are Locked On Gators, your daily podcast on the Florida Gators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Locked On Gators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. We are available daily and free wherever you listen to the podcast and on YouTube. Happy Wednesday. I'm Brandon Olsen. Joining me is Brian Smith, Locked On's recruiting insider. And before we talk about some kids, I would like to thank LinkedIn Jobs for being the official college football recruiting sponsor across the Locked On College and Network. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right candidate that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. And Brian, we're doing something a little bit different this time because we've been talking about 2025 high school kids. And for at least the first portion of today's show, we are going to visit the transfer portal with Jason Zandamela, who, of course, went to USC. Decided that he wanted to be closer to home, and so is transferring and coming to the state of Florida. What did you think of Jason Zandamela when he was coming out of high school?
Extremely athletic. I know that program well, Clearwater Academy International. Knew him a little bit. Good kid to just talk to, very grounded, very strong. And he's a guy that kind of fit what USC was doing in terms of having a mobile quarterback, running a lot of screens and stuff. And that's why he picked them originally. Florida State, Oklahoma, and a whole bunch of other schools, Miami, et cetera, were after him. National recruit. I just don't know if he wanted to be that far away from like his second home, like Clearwater Academy at the time was a boarding school. It's since closed football, but he's a guy that's kind of probably playing the state of Florida. Personality will fit in anywhere, and everybody needs a quality center. Not many guys are going to be more athletic than him at the pivot. So I'm sure he'll have plenty of opportunities.
Yeah, Jason Zandamela's family from Mozambique moved to Florida when he came to play football here, and then went to USC, and now he wants to come back home to Florida with his family. And I'm not saying this is the case for Jason Zandamela specifically, but you have to figure in the era of name, image, and likeness, the era of doing everything you possibly can to get as much social media engagement as possible. We see top 13s get dropped, and it's just like, okay, so your recruitment's wide open. Got it. So in this era where everyone wants to do like the hot button, hot topic moment, got to figure we'll continue to see kids take money to go to these big programs like USC, which is a great NIL program, commit to a place like Colorado that has, you're instantly one of the most talked about kids in the country, and then decide like, hey, actually not into the being far from home moment and hit the transfer portal to come back home, right?
I mean, NIL will play a role. The schools that give upfront NIL money, I think, are going to dwindle more and more because of what you just defined. I don't think Zandamela, it was as much about that, but it's maybe they gave him some up for, I don't know. But at the same time, your point is still logistically sound, because when you spend a bunch of money on a kid and he's only there for a year and you could have got somebody else that would have stayed, sometimes you got to be careful for what you ask. So that's the other part of this recruiting saga now, whether it's a transfer portal guy or a high school or JUCO kid. Are we getting a player, or are we getting a player for a year? I think A&M would probably be a good research study on that, because it's more the latter with a lot of their high-end guys. So, look, at the end of the day, if you're going to use NIL, you got to use it for kids that want to be at your school and compete through the depth chart. It's the hardest part of recruiting now, because you got to read through the BS on the recruit side, the parents and all that, because some of these other people around these kids, boosters and stuff, they may not know them, but the coaches have to. The trainers and people in their neighborhood, whatever, looking for a handout. If they all want the money up front, it's not a good sign.
I have to ask about just this modern era with NIL and with everything that goes on in the transfer portal as well. We always talk about how it's important for relationships with getting a commitment. How important is it as a player to not burn those bridges? Because we had Cormani McClain hit the transfer portal out of Colorado, and I was told Florida won't be pursuing him because he burned some bridges and did that with some other schools as well. So just how important is it as a recruit to actually do things the right way, even if you are chasing money, whatever it may be, but to just handle yourself the right way nowadays?
Those are the same people that will be interviewed when a player ends up going to this thing that you cover quite a bit. It's called the NFL draft. I'm going to let your mind wander on how important that is. If there's one group of people I know that are naturally stubborn, egotistical, and don't want to change much, it's college coaches. If you tick them off, whether it's rightful or not, they're probably going to burn you in return. That's subjective, but if you give them an opportunity, you took the ball out of your court and put it in theirs. A lot of people that end up being around these kids give them bad advice, and Cormani might have been one. I don't know. I know him, but I didn't try to get to know him on that level that much. He's a quiet kid, but he obviously burned bridges at Miami and UF, among others. I have no idea where he's going to go. I mean, he's a hell of an athlete, but guys like Cormani, they're a little rare. He's such a rare talent. Somebody in the SEC or ACC is going to take it. It's true. Most kids aren't Cormani, though. So if you do get the chance to go to the draft, those are the kind of reasons you may or may not get drafted. If you don't have a good base around you, and if you don't act right when you tell schools, no, I'm going to this other school, even if you make it at your original choice, those other people will chime in. Trust me, this is how it works, fairly or not. When you burn bridges in football, it'll come back around.
Yeah, there was a player in the NFL draft a couple of years ago that I was covering, and I remember hearing a coach go, "Yeah, like he was a real work. I'm gonna let him kind of tucker himself out, causing locker room issues during his senior season, and I'll get him during the NFL draft when NFL teams come calling. I will be brutally honest about what kind of player they're bringing into their locker room." And that player ended up going undrafted, and that's how things happen sometimes. But circling back to Jason Zandamela, if you're Florida, you have your established starting center in Jake Slaughter. He will be starting in 2024. Can come back for 2025 if he chooses to do so. You've got Rod Kearney backing him up. You got Kanaji Harris, Bryce Lovett also on the interior, and a few interior offensive linemen from the 2024 class as well. If you're Florida, what's the pitch to convince Jason Zandamela to come to Gainesville where there's so much young talent on the interior already?
I think he would be the starter after Jake just because he's really good. I think Kanaja Harris is a guard. Some of the other guys would probably be better at guard. They're going to put their best guys on the field, and he's a pivot man. I mean, he's a pure center. I just think he knows he would play early, but it's not a lock. I mean, he's not going to start right away, but it's probably the same at Miami or Florida State too. So we'll see what he does, but it's still UF too. It's the SEC. If you want to challenge yourself, here's the deal. Florida's not going to be able to hide here. They need tackles, not guards and centers. That's what Florida's problem is. So Jason wants to either do that or he doesn't. It's his call.
Yeah, I think that Florida should be in there for him, but yeah, it's going to be a hard pitch, I think, with how much of a logjam there is right now. But hey, got him on campus this weekend. If you can convince him there, get it done. And then again, he's one of those kids where like he's young enough where I just go, all right, you're basically an extension of the high school class for me. I don't look at you as a guy that usually go into the portal and you're like, all right, well, we want to add an immediate contributor. I don't look at that at all. I look at him as someone who's going to be an extension of the high school class. But we are about to talk about the actual high school class for 2025. But first, we're going to get a quick word from a couple sponsors. Today's episode of Locked On Gators is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And it's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Go Knicks. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed, whether your bet wins or loses. So you can bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to threes made, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. And remember that FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and free wherever you listen to the podcast. Joining me is Brian Smith, and we're moving to the 2025 recruiting class here. We're going to stick on the defensive side of the ball. Myron Charles is the next player that we're talking about. What is your opinion of his play so far?
Well, Myron Charles is a talented kid. He's 295. He can move, plays at Port Charlotte High School. My concern is he just beats the crap out of most of the kids in his area. It's one of the in-between spots between Bradenton and Venice and then on down to Fort Myers. I'm just curious what kind of jump he will make, but I've seen him in camps. I've seen him in combines. This is a guy you can't teach the size and the athleticism. That's why Florida State, Miami, UCF, Gators, and on still want a scholarship offered to him because they know eventually he can develop into a really good player at 3-tech or 1-tech. Not many guys that weigh 300 pounds move like Myron. So he has a lot of upside. Just got to see what he could do once he gets to college. But the physical tools are there, and he's a pretty easygoing guy, too.
Yeah, I've always been curious about how that goes into recruiting, where it's just you're just a better athlete than everybody. Like how impossible is that to evaluate someone where
it's ridiculous.
Like we talked about like the small school kids. Like last week, we talked about someone from a town in Oklahoma that we were both like never heard of that one.
Yep. It's not
How
easy, man.
impossible is that to evaluate someone where you're just more athletic than everyone?
Usually in those cases, I look at how hard they play when the game's out of hand or when they dominate the rep against the guy. Do they go on and take on another block or they chase the ball? Just effort stuff. The kids I worry about are the ones that are so much physically better than the other people on their field. They'll throw a guy to the ground and they stand there. That's a red flag for me. But at the same time, sometimes every coach has a different view on this, but many think, well, I'll be the one to change it. It's almost like the bad boyfriend thing and some girl goes back. It's the same kind of deal. It really is. You have to be careful for what you ask, though, because sometimes the talent doesn't matter. You and I were talking about one of those guys before this podcast, somebody that was at UF at one point, I'll leave it at that, who's not doing real well because he's an idiot. You have to be able to understand that effort never changes. And you have to understand that when you go into, SEC program like the University of Florida Gators, your effort has to go up another notch on top of that because everybody's good. That's the part where evaluating is all but impossible. I don't know what the kid's going to be like in 2 years from a mentality standpoint. Myron Charles is going to be 300 pounds and athletic. So are a lot of other guys. Is he going to be able to take that and elevate it? I don't know. He plays at Port Charlotte, far from a dominant program in the state of Florida. I can assure you that. So I'm curious to see what he does too, because that's a kid that I wouldn't bet one way or the other, but everybody's looking at the numbers too. There just aren't enough 300-pound guys that can move, so they're going to take a chance on a DT almost every time.
Yeah, and with Myron Charles, I mean, he said that Billy Napier is telling him that, you're a guy that we think can come in and play early, like that kind of defensive lineman. Do you think he's capable of doing that at an acceptable level? And I want to put that caveat of as at an acceptable level, because I feel like there's a lot of times we talk about kids and it's, well, they're weak at this spot, they're weak at this spot. And so sure, maybe he can come in and play. I want to know if you can come in and play well from day one.
I highly doubt it. I mean, SEC level D tackle play as a freshman is just as rare as it gets. There are 2 or 3 kids a year that might be able to do that. I don't think Myron's on that level. And this is where I think playing at Port Charlotte hurts him. We're not going to get enough evaluation and watch him beat up on some small white kids that he's playing against. I mean, that's just the way it is. But I've seen him in camp settings against bigger guys his own size. When he wants to go, when he wants to throw hands and he wants to use moves, he's a lot to deal with. There's just not enough example size for me to sign off on him playing early for the Gators inside the swamp. That's a lot to ask.
Yeah, and I do have to ask if you think this, do you think this is going to be a recruitment that comes down to the wire or a summer commitment, whatever it may be? Because right now we've got OVs scheduled currently with Florida, Miami, and Florida State. And then he's got potential OVs that he wants to set up with USC, Auburn, Texas, and Georgia.
Myron's all over the place. I know him well. This, I will say, he's a kid that is as pure a Florida kid as it gets. We were in Atlanta a month or so ago, and I was making fun of him along with everybody else because his teeth were chattering and it was only 40 degrees. Like Michigan and Ohio State were like, do you want us just to call him now and tell him that you're never going to visit? Because there's no chance he's like, if he does, he'll transfer. He's not a fit. So I think he'll stay in state. The other places I think he just wants to see to get out and visit when that's cool, but he's going to go in state. And if I had to guess, Florida State is the leader, but that's really guessing because he's going to visit all of these schools and he's been to all of these places multiple times on officials. My guess is he'll make a decision this summer, but he'll still take calls. He might even take a few unofficials in the fall. I don't think Myron's any rush.
Yeah, this is going to be one of those recruitments where it's fun because all the big Florida schools are in on it, and it's just going to be, even if he doesn't work out, it's just going to become a trash talking point of whoever secures a commitment that all of the schools are looking for. But we do have one more player that we're going to talk about today. But first, we are going to get a couple words from our sponsors. It's halftime now. We've been there either as a player or as a fan, and scoreboard's not looking too good for you. You're feeling low, not sure you or your team can pull out a win. But that's when you dig deep, lift up your head, and say to yourself, all right, time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, and take as much of my friends' money as I possibly can. That's right. The smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. And it's Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime. So you don't have to sit there with 4 hours of trying to play the game. Now you can play whenever you want on your phone. There's so much to do. You can play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards, make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball, and you can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store and on Google Play. Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer that it gets to first pitch. So on May 14th, I can tell you where I will be. I will be watching the Philadelphia Phillies at Citi Field against the New York Mets, where hopefully the Mets will be able to win that game. But I'm going to wait until the day before or even the day of to get tickets because I want to see a good pitcher battle there. And also, I know that I'll get the best price there with Game Time. So you can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms to apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and free wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. And we're going to wrap up today's show by talking about Jarquez Carter. We're sticking on the defensive line here for the Florida Gators. Jarquez Carter has been to Gainesville 3 times during spring ball itself. He has an official visit scheduled. Before we talk about his recruitment itself, what do you think about Jarquez Carter's film?
He's a get up the field, one gap guy, 6'2", 6'3", really athletic, plays at Newberry High School. It's just a little bit west of Gainesville. It's almost a suburb, really. It's half hour or so away. Good kid, very positive. Another kid plays at a smaller program, but he dominates like he should. I think his first step get off is what most schools are looking at, like Miami, et cetera, like this kid. I think his upside's really high. The question is, how well will he adapt if he leaves Florida? Kind of like Myron. I think he's a Florida kid. I think he'll do better there, but he's looking at some schools outside the state. We'll see. But first step quickness, man. If you're going to run a system that'll play a 4-3, kind of a traditional, he would be the best fit in that. And I think that's probably something that he needs to work on. He could probably be a 2-gap guy if he gained some more weight, but he's a little wider right now, 270, 275.
Yeah, and we know that Jarquez Carter is planning on committing in the fall. He said he wants to commit after his Ohio State visit, which is in the fall. How does Florida kind of maintain or even improve their position with Carter, where he's got OVs with Miami, UCF, Penn State, Ohio State, and Florida? So a generally Florida-centric recruitment, but then you've got Penn State and Ohio State as big-time Big Ten programs. So just how does Florida kind of improve their positioning here?
They need to win. I mean, it's the same thing. Between now and in the season, obviously, you continue to build a relationship. He's at most on a bad day, traffic-wise, he's 50 minutes from campus. So it's not hard to get Jarquez over, to hang out. I'm sure he's got friends at some of the high schools in the greater Gainesville area anyway. So now the question is, how do you get him to continuously come around and improve upon your chance to land him? That relationship building never changes, as you know, Brandon. So I would say that's the key. Then once you get to the season, you got to prove something. Penn State had arguably the best defense in the country last year. Ohio State might have the best one this year. Miami, Florida State, all these different schools recruiting him. They got something to sell too. So relationships is where it starts for the Gators.
And for Florida, with a recruit like Jarquez Carter, where, again, a lot of the attention is in state for him, how important is it for the Florida Gators to have the schedule that they have right now, where it's not just a very tough schedule, but you play Miami, UCF, and Florida State. So you could realistically walk away with head-to-head wins over any of those schools that you are going to be competing with many recruits for. So how much does that really go into play, where you then get to go, oh yeah, like, oh, Florida State's looking at you, well, we beat them. Miami's looking at you, well, we beat them. UCF's looking at you, well, we beat them.
I mean, for most schools, I don't think it's as big a deal as some make it out to be, but because so few people like yourself and myself are a little iffy on the Gators this year, if they can prove they're on the uprise, then it becomes a factor. Florida State's recruiting has changed since they started winning big last year. It's not a coincidence. Kids want to play for a team that's got a chance to go to the playoff. Imagine that. If they can go 8-4 or better this year, I think they would improve their chances, not only with Jarquez Carter, but anybody we mentioned on this show. Nobody wants to stay home during bowl season. So I'm sure Florida Gator fans will back me up on that. They're not real happy with where the program's at. Win football games now. That's it, brother.
Yeah, and Jarquez Carter has mentioned that he's close with starting nose tackle Cam Jackson. And again, we know that they're generally different kinds of guys. Jarquez Carter is probably going to be more of a gap shooter, whereas Cam Jackson is just eat up as many blocks as you possibly can. And obviously, every recruit is different here. But do you think being close with a player, his play is then impacted that recruitment? Like he's close with Cam Jackson. If Cam goes off or plays poorly, is that generally something where a recruit's going to go like, oh, I can do that? Or, he had a rough year after a good year. Maybe development's not a thing, whatever that may be with someone that you're close with at your position or position adjacent.
I think that he'll just take in what the coaching staff is like from Cam or anybody else that he speaks with there. Again, being that close, he's going to know some of the guys. I'm sure they've sat him down with him, let him hang out with him. They're going to tell him what it's like at UF, and he'll go by that more than anything else. Kids generally think they're better than what they are. It doesn't matter the player, even if it's number one player in the country. So I'm not too concerned about that. They want to know how they're coached, what the relationships are like, and can they fit in with that locker room overall, staff included. So Cam will be a good resource for him no matter what.
Yeah, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. If you had to say today, which again, we know that this is going to be months and months in advance, if you had to say today, where do you think Jarquez Carter winds up?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. Florida's as good a bet as any. Penn State would be the school I would look out for. They do a tremendous job of recruiting Florida, and they've got an elite defense. I would be careful with the Nittany Lion. They have killed it in Florida the last few years, getting visits and stuff. Do not sleep on that program.
Yeah, they kill it with getting great players to their program and getting great athletes to the NFL. Every year, there's like, oh yeah, this guy, he ran the fastest 40 for a defensive lineman. He had the best 10-yard split, also 3-cone and broad. And it's just like, where'd he go? Penn State. So that's just what they've become now at Penn State there. But thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. Thank you so much, Brian, for joining us today. We will have you again later this week for Locked On Gators. I'm Brandon Olsen. Follow me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon, and we will see you all next time.